Hello everybody, I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. In this episode, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to award-winning illustrator and MS Trust Ambassador, Ananya Rao-Middleton. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi Ananya, how are you?
Hi Evie, I'm very good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm really, really good, thank you. How's your day going so far?
I'm absolutely loving today. I just got back from a really lovely short vacation in the countryside, so I can't complain.
Oh, really? Oh my gosh, that's so cool. I think I bet that was really enjoyable for you. And I think it's nice to have those little breaks away sometimes, those little vacations, even if they're not like a hot holiday abroad or anything. Sometimes the little like vacations and things you have are also really, really nice.
Absolutely, and it's just close to where I live, but also a change in scenery, so I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, sometimes those changes of scenery are really nice as well, just to switch things up a little bit from what you're used to.
Absolutely.
So, I believe that, like me, you have some disabilities. So, you have multiple sclerosis and post-concussion syndrome. So, can you tell me a little bit about them?
Absolutely. So for me, they're both very connected, even though a lot of people don't necessarily have both. The reason being is that in 2018, I was involved in an accident with when I went go-karting, funnily enough, and that resulted in me getting a brain injury, which is the post-concussion syndrome. And that really affected me in so many different ways. We kind of forget that, of course, the brain is the center of pretty much everything. And so when that's impacted, it means that we can get impacted emotionally, physically, in terms of our vision, lots of different things. So I had a lot of different symptoms come up from that. But interestingly, the reason why both are connected is because when my doctors were trying to figure out why is it that she has not been able to resolve her symptoms from her brain injury yet? It's taking a really long time. So they actually did an MRI of my brain and accidentally found that I had some lesions in my brain, which indicated that I had MS. And so that was investigated some more. And after a couple of months, I had an official diagnosis of relapse remitting MS, which is a type of MS that you can get.
Right. Okay. Gosh, yeah, they are very connected, aren't they?
Mhm.
So obviously, like you mentioned, having a brain injury is quite a sort of significant thing. So how does that sort of affect you?
Yeah, it really is. And to be honest, I have to say that at the moment it's very peripheral to my day-to-day life. I still say that I have post-concussion syndrome in the sense that I don't think that many people fully 100% really recover from it. So for me, what that looks like at the moment is that sometimes if I'm really stressed or say, for example, I'm going up some stairs that are wonky, it might mean that my brain kind of gets a bit confused and I might get a bit dizzy. And that's because primarily for me, and keeping in mind that everybody with a brain injury has may have overlapping symptoms, but some of my friends who I know who've had exactly the same injury as me have had very different symptoms to me as well. And for me, the main thing that was really affected was my vestibular system, which is in charge of things like your balance, your coordination, the way that you see things. And so back in the first year and a half of my injury, the main things for me were that I was just dizzy all the time. I was really dizzy. I'd wake up, just everything would be swaying. I had borderline double vision. So if I looked at an object, a couple of maybe like a ruler's width or more ahead of me, it would look like it was moving and vibrating because my eyes would be trying to coordinate my vision and kind of failing. So I had a lot of really extreme symptoms in the first year and a half. And after a lot of physiotherapy and therapy specific for my vestibular system, I managed to recover a lot of that back.
Right. Okay. So obviously that's good that you've been able to recover a lot of that back, but obviously, yeah, it will still affect you, but it's good that it's peripheral at the minute. But I'm imagining that when you first sort of discovered that you did have post-concussion syndrome and you did have a brain injury, I can imagine that had quite a sort of significant impact on your life. So kind of what emotions were you feeling when you were learning those things?
Really glad that you asked that because I think that one thing that we collectively kind of forget about is that these things really do have a huge impact on us emotionally. And I think really the first thing that I felt was a lot of fear and also a lot of confusion because in the initial week or so after the head injury, I wasn't put in hospital or anything like that. So I was trying to do my regular routines, go to work, go to the gym, and I was just feeling more and more confused and sick. And what is really interesting about brain injuries themselves is that when we think about our emotions related to it, it's not just our emotional response to the symptoms that we're experiencing, but actually, emotional changes are a symptom of brain injuries in and of itself. So I'm not sure whether you've heard that sometimes people who have brain injuries can have personality changes. That's often a very common symptom because our brains are also responsible for our emotional responses. So I personally found that not only was I really distressed and sad and confused about the brain injury and everything that I was experiencing, I also found that the brain injury actually made me a lot more emotional. So I would cry over really random things and didn't really understand why. So it affected me as a symptom emotionally as well.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I can imagine that it would have been very, very confusing, obviously, like you say, trying to do your normal routine, but just something doesn't feel right, and then not being really able to put your finger on what's happening exactly until you got a diagnosis. I can't imagine how scary that would have been for you.
Yeah, it was really scary. And I think, I was only 25 at the time when it happened. So I was in the middle of just enjoying my 20s and, going to work. I had a boyfriend. I just felt like, life was really fun. And that was kind of, it felt like that was really taken away from me at a time when it shouldn't have been.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been incredibly difficult for you. So, what would you say are some of the common misunderstandings you encounter regarding the disabilities that you have?
Well, I think the main thing is that, and again, this is something that multiple sclerosis and brain injuries often have in common, is that not everybody has physical symptoms of either of those illnesses. And so, a really big, I guess, stigma that I faced was that people would look at me and be like, you don't look disabled, you don't look sick. And it felt like I almost had to prove that I was disabled enough or sick enough to actually be seen that way. And so I really did experience a lot of stigmatization because of the quote unquote invisibility of my conditions, which is interesting because it didn't really feel invisible to me. And so that really taught me a lot about the narrow preconceptions people have about what disability is, and that a lot of it falls into physical categories of, oh, someone's in a wheelchair or someone has a limb difference, as opposed to thinking about chronic illness and things that affect, our brains, neurological conditions, which concussions and brain injuries and MS are, is that they're neurological, but they have full body impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that comment, you don't look disabled, it's one you hear a lot about, I think, in the disabled community. And it's such a strange thing to say to someone, I think, because how, like, obviously, yes, some people who are disabled are in a wheelchair or, like you say, have a limb difference. But like you also say, not all disabilities are visible,
Mhm.
and not all disabilities are sort of surface level and things that you can see. And sometimes it's like, well, why should I have to look disabled for you to think that I'm disabled? I think it's such a strange comment to make to someone. Um, and yeah, I completely get what you mean about those sort of preconceptions that anyone who has a disability, it's visible, which is definitely not the case.
Absolutely. And I think it's just very limiting. It means and I think that there are very real life consequences to that way of thinking, because when you think about people who are disabled and need to prove their disability to access benefits or things that are going to help improve their quality of life, this stigma then really comes into play with making them have to prove themselves. And then you get a lot of people with things like MS who are very sick but who aren't quote unquote disabled enough in terms of how they look when they go and when they go and apply for benefits, for example. And then, that really can actually have a very serious material and economic consequence for people.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, and obviously certain certain disabilities can affect everyone differently as well. Like if
Yeah.
I think about people who are visually impaired, there are so many conditions, there's so many eye conditions that people can have which can render them visually impaired. And everyone in that community has different levels of sight and has different access needs. And I think that's the same for every disability as well. So someone might not look visually impaired or look blind because they don't walk with a cane or use a guide dog or read braille, but they definitely are. I mean, that's just from, you the experience that I've sort of learned from talking to other guests with visual impairments, but it's the same for every disability in it, the fact that it affects everyone differently.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yes.
So you are an incredibly talented illustrator. So was art always a career path for you, or was it something that developed over time?
Thank you so much, first of all. Yeah, I mean, for me, I had been drawing since I can first remember. Art has always been such a huge part of my life. And when I was a kid, I would be drawing nonstop. I would go through sketchbooks so quickly. My parents were constantly having to somehow produce more paper and more pens for me, all the time. And so it was always something that I just loved. I felt really in tune with, and a way that I very intuitively expressed myself. But unfortunately, when I went through school, I really just had this lack of belief in myself. And it meant that I didn't think that I was good enough as an artist to pursue art as a career path. And so I actually didn't go to art school at all. I studied history and anthropology at university and then did a master's degree in South Asian studies, which was also a big passion of mine. And it was only around my brain injury, when I couldn't do anything. I couldn't use my phone, I couldn't use my laptop, I couldn't watch TV, that I came back to art and started watercolor painting, because it actually quieted my brain and lessened some of my symptoms. So I came full circle, and I've never really fully disconnected from art, but I didn't think that it was a feasible career path. And I'm really grateful that chronic illness is not easy, disability is not easy, but those are the things that reconnected me with art.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you really have kind of come, you really had a full circle moment with that. Um, and I think what you say there about not necessarily believing in yourself and thinking that you were good enough to pursue it as a career, I think self-belief is a really difficult thing because I think it's something that quite a lot of people experience where they just don't think that they are good enough to do something and that can dissuade them from doing that. And it's a really difficult thing because obviously for you it meant that you didn't think you could pursue art as a career and luckily you have now. But it's one of those really hard things that a lot of people experience, but it can be really difficult to deal with.
Absolutely. And I think it's often just because we don't give ourselves a chance. When I really didn't believe in myself, I expected my skills to be the same as an established artist who had already made a career of their artwork. I didn't give myself the opportunity to fail, the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to learn those skill sets. And I think that, a lot of people are really just afraid of making mistakes and not being quote unquote, good enough when actually the process and the journey towards whatever it is that you want to achieve is beautiful and it's always good enough.
Yeah, 100%. I think, yeah, like you say there about making mistakes, mistakes help you learn, but I think a lot of people are afraid to make them. And I think as humans, there's this we kind of lots of people have this thing where they want to be perfect at something the first time they do it. And if you're not perfect at it the first time you try it, you kind of lose you lose enjoyment for it because you don't allow yourself to learn and to practice. And obviously there's that saying practice makes perfect. The more you do something, the better you'll get at it. But I think as humans we have this thing where we just want to be perfect at something first time. And it's such a strange thing that we do, but it like you say, it sort of dissuades people from wanting to make mistakes and then learn from them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's just understanding that we're like, even the people that you look up to are on their journeys. They probably don't think sometimes that they're good enough. And so it's just understanding that we're not striving towards perfection, we're striving towards fulfillment and feeling happy and confident in ourselves. And that's something that can start from the very beginning of whatever journey we're on.
Yeah, definitely. So, what would you say you enjoy about creating illustrations?
Oh, there are so many things, to be honest. I have always loved colors. So for me, one of my favorite things is really bringing an illustration to life by using colors that I've picked myself. And I have so much fun just figuring out what kind of colors go well together and creating a color palette for a piece of work because I think that colors can bring out a specific mood. They can help us to like interpret the artwork as well. But also, I think a really important part of it that I absolutely love is the storytelling that goes into my work. I feel like visual arts is like a really incredible way to tell stories about people, about communities, about life events. And sometimes it's a really helpful way, I think, to talk about the issues that maybe are hard to verbalize or hard to write about for whatever reason, such as sometimes disability, because I think that a lot of people don't know really how to approach talking about disability or what it can look like. And so for me, that's like a challenge that really excites me about the kind of work that I do.
Yeah, 100%. I can totally understand that. Obviously I can't see your illustrations, but I have been told that you like to use lots of bright colors
Mhm.
and you often use women of color in your illustrations as well. But I have been told I do know that you really enjoy using bright colors and picking out that color palette. Would you
Yes.
say that sort of creating illustrations is a bit of an escape for you?
I do think so. Although now that it's my career, I have to say that sometimes work is not always an escape for me.
Yeah.
It's become work like anybody else's work. But I do really enjoy thinking about separate personal projects that are more passion driven. And that's where I think it can really become a nice escape. And I think that one thing that I find as well is that when I'm illustrating, particularly at the color stage, so for me, just to kind of think about my process is that I'll often create a sketch first, and then I will finalize it by, creating the color and like coloring everything in and adding all the details. And at that point, after a sketch has been finalized, is where I can really just forget about the rest of the world and just hone in on the color aspect. And that gives me a lot of peace, and hours can fly by.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, if you're doing something you enjoy, like time goes so quickly. I was going to ask you about the process of how you create your art actually.
Yeah.
But what I will, what I will ask you, obviously you've kind of explained that you start with a sketch and then work on the finer details. But what I will ask you is, how do you sort of pick out a color palette for like a specific illustration that you do?
That's a great question. I think it really depends. Again, if it's personal work for me, I kind of go back to my favorite colors because I'm a person of habit. And I'm like, it has to have lilac and it has to have this color. And so I kind of go back to that. But when I'm working specifically on projects for clients, sometimes people already have colors in mind, or maybe they have like a brand color palette. So occasionally I will already have colors that I need to use. But for me, I think there are some important things to consider when we think of colors, and it goes back to kind of what you were saying earlier for people who are visually impaired, and the kind of spectrum of experiences of being visually impaired is that when I select colors, I also am really mindful of things like contrast and whether colors for people who have different needs in terms of the way that they will look at my work can actually see it without it being kind of difficult to look at. So I'll often switch between color and black and white just to make sure that two colors don't kind of merge together in a black and white context, for example. So that also informs the colors that I use. But in terms of the colors that I pick, I often look to nature. So I love picking colors from sunsets and sunrises, for example.
Oh yeah, I mean that sounds amazing. But I'm getting from that then that picking the colors for these illustrations, there's a lot of thought that goes into it.
Yeah, there is, and I like to be thoughtful about these things because I think that as a visual artist, there are a lot of accessibility considerations that I think are important for me to think about when I'm creating work, and especially because a lot of my work focuses on disability. So I've been trying to upskill myself and learn more about how I can be more inclusive with my work, not just in terms of who I'm representing, but in terms of the actual process of creation and what it looks like for people who are looking at it.
Yeah, and I mean that's absolutely brilliant. So can you tell me about some of the illustration projects that you've worked on?
Absolutely. So recently, I actually had a very big project that just came out. I worked on this a while ago because sometimes with bigger clients, you might work on something over a year ago and then it's suddenly released, a long time later, and it can be a bit like, oh, great, I forgot about that. So I actually worked on this in January and February last year, so a really long time ago. But I did a collaboration with Starbucks to highlight the disabled community for Disability Pride Month, which was in July. And so all over the US and every single Starbucks are my cups. And there are three cups. There's a thermostat, there's a water bottle, and there's, I think in America they call it a tumbler, which is like a really, really big cup. We don't have anything like that in the UK, I don't think. And to give you a kind of visual description of the three, the big cup has a visual of a community garden. So there's lots of flowers, there are bushes, it's super vibrant, like there are lots of different colors coming out in terms of the plants that I've illustrated, like green leaves, blue leaves, red leaves. I also have included sunflowers in all of the designs because that symbolizes invisible disabilities. And in the community garden are several different people with different disabilities. There's somebody in a wheelchair, there's somebody who has a shaven head. The idea was that they were going through maybe chemotherapy and they're wearing a mask. Someone with a limb difference, another person with a CGM device on their arm, and they're all just collaborating in the garden together. Um, the second one is the thermostat, and that has basically a group of people who are all like in a group hug, and it has the slogan "Care and Community" on it. And again, they're all people who have different disabilities of different types as well. They're surrounded by these big green leaves and the yellow sunflowers and a couple of like different squiggles and stuff. And that's just to kind of make the background look really fun and exciting. And then the last one is the water bottle. And the main feature of that is the care and community slogan. And it's kind of it's white text sitting on like a dark blue background and surrounded by these kind of, I guess they're tulips. I didn't really think about what kind of flowers they are, but now looking at it, they're definitely tulips, like pink tulips and more like bright green leaves and a really, really, really big sunflower in the background. And all of them, Starbucks are really, they've been really lovely to work with, and they put my name on everything, and they have a bit about my story as a disabled artist as well. So those are the three, and I have samples sitting in my flat because they sent me a bunch, but they're all over the US, which is really cool.
Oh, wow. I mean, they sound incredible. And thank you so much for the visual description as well. But they
Cool.
sound absolutely incredible. And I mean, yeah, Starbucks is such a big company. And for them to be all over the US, I mean, that must be amazing for you. But you've worked with lots of big companies before. So how does it feel when you get asked to work with these companies?
Yeah, I think for me initially I used to feel super excited, of course, naturally, and initially a little bit of imposter syndrome because I was like, wow, maybe I'm just really lucky that these opportunities have come my way. Whereas I've really kind of worked on changing my mindset around that to be like, no, they have chosen to work with me because they see me as someone with a specific skill set. Like I've worked really hard to get where I am. My work kind of tells some really interesting stories. And so now I'm excited, but I'm also more just like grateful. And yeah, I think it never gets old to, see an exciting email in my inbox from a brand that I want to collaborate with. So
Yeah, I'm guessing that must be like the best feeling in the world whenever you see those emails show up.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think one of my favorite ones actually was from last year, and I collaborated with The Guardian and was able to do the front cover of the Observer magazine as well as like a couple of spreads on the inside. And that was very meaningful for me as a project because it was around highlighting the gender pain gap, which is where women's pain is not taken seriously. So it was super meaningful and very personal. I absolutely loved that.
Oh yeah, I mean that sounds brilliant. So you've mentioned that art is a great way to tell stories. So what do you think are the benefits of using art to educate and tell those stories?
I think the main benefit is that we as artists have a unique position where we can talk about things that are taboo or have stigma or are just uncomfortable to talk about and make them more accessible through our artwork. Like I think that art has the power to evoke emotions in ways that maybe other mediums don't. So I think that we're able to bridge like emotional gaps that people have when engaging in different things, and also to show people what something looks like, what someone's life looks like through artwork is a very powerful way for somebody to step into somebody's shoes and be able to empathize with them. So I think that the way that artwork is able to get people to empathize more is really, really unique to visual art.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, like you say, it's such a powerful medium, and I think there are so many benefits to it. Um, In terms, I mean, obviously every medium is different and every medium can tell stories in different ways, but I think art is a very powerful one.
Mhm.
Um, so I know that you are an ambassador for the MS Trust. So what would you say you hope to achieve with this role?
Yeah, I really want to raise awareness about the different aspects of MS and I think just what it looks like to live with MS because sometimes I think, especially when I was newly diagnosed, I was really scared because my doctor around the diagnosis time was like, don't look up what MS is because it will just scare you. And there's nothing you can do about it because it's incurable. And all of those messages, I think, can create so much fear in people, especially when you're newly diagnosed. So I think for me, now that I'm in a place where I really understand my illness, I've been able to manage it really successfully. I feel very open to talking with the rest of the community, and particularly people who are newly diagnosed, to kind of reassure and to just provide a voice that's that shows that it is possible to live with MS and it's possible to live really well with MS. And that sometimes there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of stigmas that we can, address and talk about, but also just that when you have an illness, and particularly one like MS, where someone might not necessarily know from looking at you, it can be really lonely. So just providing, I think, that extra voice in the community through the MS Trust to say you're not alone.
Yeah, I think that's such an important message to spread, and one I've actually talked about with a lot of my guests about having that support network around you because I think as humans we all go through events in life that are difficult, whether that's having a disability or I mean there are so many things.
Mhm.
Um, but I think one of the really important things to have in your life is a support network around you who can listen when you're struggling, who can sort of pick you up when you're not feeling great. And obviously, not everyone has that support network, but it's such an important thing to have to, like you say, let you know that you're not alone and there are other people going through this and there are people that are willing to help you.
Absolutely. I think that's so powerful and it can make such a huge difference to people, like it did for me when especially with the brain injury that I had, it was the community that I found that got me through it. And I don't know what I would have done without them. And now they're some of my best friends, you know. I actually visited one of those people on my countryside vacation.
Oh, really? Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's like you say, I think it's great that you had that community around you who were there to help you through it, and you're now like super close with, and
Mhm.
they're some of your closest friends. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a huge difference as well because I think having that community and then those people becoming your friends, it means that they understand your experiences. And I think when you are disabled or chronically ill, or even thinking about it in terms of something else like race, for example, it's so helpful to have people who share your experiences around you because then you feel really validated in the world.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with that. Like, it's so important to have friends who are going through some similar things to you, who have gone through similar experiences to you, because obviously you're gonna have friends who haven't been through the same experiences, and obviously they're friends, they're gonna listen to you and they're gonna empathize with you, but the ones who've been through the same thing, there's just that connection there where you're both in the same boat. You can both talk about what you've been through and kind of know exactly what the other one means when they say certain things. And
Mhm.
so that I think having friends who have experienced the same or similar things to you, one of the most important things you can have, I'd say.
Definitely agree with you. I love them so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I have other visually impaired friends too, and they're amazing.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah, yeah, they're really great. So, what would you say then has been your proudest moment so far?
Proudest moment so far? That's a really great question. I think there have been multiple moments, but for me, really, I think it was the Guardian campaign because of how hard hitting it was, and because we were trying to not just raise awareness, but actually make a tangible difference in the lives of women who experience chronic pain. that really meant a lot. And I think that it was after we launched that campaign. So, the Observer copy was out there in the world, in the UK, all over the country. And then I got an email from the art director that I worked with, and she said, Ananya, like, we have amazing news from Nurofen, who we partnered with for the campaign. So they funded, the project and all the research. And I got told by the art director that actually the campaign was so successful that we managed to raise, I think, over £100,000 to train GPs in the UK in understanding women's pain in order to lessen the gender pain gap. And I was like, wow, that is the kind of impact that I really want to have through my work. It just felt amazing.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I can't imagine what that would have felt like, but I'm guessing it was probably the most incredible feeling in the world.
It really was. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, that is the impact and the success that you want a campaign to have. And it's so brilliant that it did have that impact and you raised so much. I mean, that is exactly what you want from a campaign like that.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it's just knowing that you can pair all of these, like we said before, there are lots of different ways to get messages across, whether that's through visual arts, writing, speaking, like more like mixed media things. I think that it just showed me the power of putting out the kind of work that I do, but also the kind of work that the people that I collaborate do as well.
Yeah, 100%. So, what would you say then are your aspirations and goals for the future?
I love that. I think for me, so at the moment, the majority of things that I do is related to illustration, but I also do some work as a consultant that helping companies and brands to become more disability inclusive, to understand what disability justice is, and to kind of integrate that into their culture at work. And I see myself kind of just thinking bigger and bigger in terms of problems that disabled people face in the world, not just the UK, but outside of the UK as well, and thinking like how I can help to problem solve that. So I don't really know what that looks like yet, but I just want to think really big in terms of, could I develop an app for something? Could I be part of like a really big solution for something? And how can I put my existing skills and stretch into new skills to do that?
Oh my gosh, I mean, that sounds absolutely brilliant. And obviously I wish you the best of luck with whatever you do, and I'm sure that it whatever you decide to do in the end will be extremely successful, just like everything else you've done. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I mean, you're such a brilliant person. I mean, you create the most gorgeous, amazing illustrations that not only are beautiful to look at but have really amazing messages behind them. So, I mean, yeah, you're such a wonderful person, and it's been such a pleasure to get to meet you. So, thank you so much for talking to me.
Oh, thank you so much, Evie. I really appreciate you saying that. And I also want to say that I think what you do is incredible. It's not every day that you meet someone who's in school. And I remember how busy and hectic school was. I was super stressed. So the fact that you're doing all of that normal stuff, and then you're creating a podcast that has such beautiful messaging that is so important, and it's like, highlighting all of your passions. I think you're an incredible person, and I can't wait to see what you continue to create through your work as well.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you to say. I mean, honestly, the podcast is made by the guests, and that's something I will always say. The podcast episodes that the podcast wouldn't be the same without the amazing guests that I get, and I'm haven't been doing it for too long, so I'm still trying to find my feet with it. But thank you so much. That's so kind of you to say. And yeah, school is stressful.
It was
But
stressful. I remember the stress. Yes,
school is
absolutely.
stressful, but we're balancing it, so it's all right.
Amazing. Amazing. I'm really happy for you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.